Happy Monday, Downtown Rotary. Thank you all for being here today. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in reciting the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I'd like to invite Eric S. Ellefson for our invocation.
Thank you, President Cindy. Hello, fellow Rotarians. This is the final week of Mentoring Month. Thank you for everyone who's contributed to the programming around SiouxFalls.Business and mentoring. And thank you to all of you for the mentoring that you do. And if you're not currently, I encourage you both with my own words and the words of this invocation to consider mentoring. So please bow your heads with me if you choose. Lord, thank you for the chance to gather today to build better friendships and learn something new. Thanks for this meal, Lord, and for those who prepared it. We ask for your blessing on those who are struggling with either their own health problems or the sickness of family members. And Lord, thank you for the desire that you put on our hearts to impact the lives around us. You've planted us in the right place, in the right families, in the right situations, to be ambassadors of peace, truth, fairness, and goodwill. And we ask you, Lord, when mentoring children, give us the patience to listen and the wisdom to challenge. When mentoring peers, give us the humility to learn as much as we teach. When mentoring those who are trying to rebuild their lives, enable us to be sincere encouragers. And when mentoring the homebound or those who are lonely, help us to be attentive listeners and thoughtful question askers. God, you're the provider of all things to all people. Thank you for your provision. Build up in us the courage to step out into new challenges and to get uncomfortable for the sake of better understanding another person, and the desire to give more than we receive. In your name, amen.
Eric, thank you not only for that invocation, but for all the work that you've done and the leadership that you've shown behind the scenes to make sure that National Mentoring Month was something our club could enjoy all the way through. So could you please thank Eric with me for all of his effort and the committee's effort for SiouxFalls.Business? We have a number of guests with us today, and we realize people are kind of moving and shaking still. It's a lot of fun to see all this energy. Truly, from 12 to 1 every Monday has got to be, if not my favorite, one of my favorite hours each and every week. So I'm so glad that you're all with us today. I welcome all of our guests and thank our greeters for the time and the volunteering that they did to make everyone's first impression really positive and really welcoming. I also want to welcome our junior Rotarians, Jack Hendricks from Washington. And then speaking today, we have Evelyn Brenner from O'Gorman. We have a number of items for Rotary Business. The first is a recognition of Jim Schnatterly as a Paul Harris Fellow +1. As a reminder, being cited as a Paul Harris Fellow is Rotary International's way of recognizing leadership contributions to the Rotary Foundation. For those who might not know Jim, he has been a downtown Rotarian for 28 years. And while Jim is not able to join us today in person, I was told he might be tuning in. So if you would all please join me for celebrating his decades of membership and for being a Paul Harris Fellow +1. Congratulations, Jim. If you haven't already checked out the one-pager sitting at all of the tables, our More Than Monday committee has coordinated a new In the Know opportunity. I think this one is going to be very cool. We get to have a tour of Minnehaha County's Juvenile Detention Center. And again, those flyers are on the table. That is set for Tuesday, February 21st. From what I understand, there is a limited number of people who are able to go. So if this is something you're interested in doing, please RSVP right away and then stay committed to that reservation. Next, I want to invite Kayla Etram up to introduce today's Downtown Rotarian presenter. Where is Kayla? Come on, and presenter, come this way.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have another great student for you to meet today. It's Avalon Brenner from O'Gorman High School. Avalon is the president of Students Against Destructive Decisions and Teens Against Tobacco Use, president of Environmental Awareness Club, and is also involved in wrestling. She volunteers every school day except Wednesdays at Hawthorne Elementary with students and details semis at her father's used semi truck dealership. Avalon is interested in collecting vintage cameras, listening to music, and spending time with her sister. Avalon plans to attend Texas Tech University to major in political science and minor in psychology with a future occupation as a lawyer. Please help me welcome Avalon Brenner from O'Gorman High School.
Hello, I'm Avalon Brenner and I'm from O'Gorman High School. I was the first girls wrestler at my school, and that's what influenced my speech today. I want to highlight my lessons from the wrestling room that I have continued to incorporate into my life every day. Now, to start, wrestling is one of the hardest things I've ever done. Wrestling is one of the toughest and most physically demanding sports that anyone can take part in. Throughout my 2 years of this sport, I have learned a lot, but there are 3 things that I have found are the most important on how I carry out my everyday life. The first lesson is you must learn from your losses. I've always seen the phrase, you win some, you lose some, as a very pessimistic way to look at things. But with the right mentality, it doesn't get more optimistic than that. You can't expect to win every match or pin every opponent. Of course, it's good to go into anything wanting success, but sometimes you might lose a match, and sometimes it might be against someone that, in the back of your mind, you know you could have beat. No matter what the outcome may be, you can take any negative into a positive. By looking back and recognizing your faults, you can learn and grow. I relate this to most of my work in school. Learning is a process, and I recognize that I probably won't understand everything right away. I may get some questions wrong on a quiz, but by getting those questions wrong, I'm able to more effectively learn to get some of those same questions right on the test. Like most of the things in life, learning is a process, which you must be patient with in order to succeed. The next lesson I have learned is you need to trust the process. When it comes to technique, the little things are what make the biggest difference. When taking a shot on your opponent that doesn't go as planned, it is important to think about the small things you can tweak to improve. Maybe that means having a tighter lock or keeping your head tighter to their body. Whatever it is, the small critiques are what make the biggest difference in how you take your shot and take your opponent down. You will rarely perform a move perfectly your first time, and you must take it step by step to get it down right. This has been very easy to parallel in my life. Taking things step by step allows for a more thorough understanding of the task at hand. Though sometimes it may seem easier to take things the easy way out, the most prosperous outcomes always come from patience and trusting in the process. With the process of becoming a better wrestler, I have learned that practice doesn't always make perfect, but practice does make progress. And having this mentality has helped me to reach my goals. My final and most important lesson that I've learned is your mentality is everything. The key phrase that any wrestling coach will use is you need to stay mentally tough. There's no denying how tough wrestling is, but your mentality is what predicts the outcome. Something our coach has us do before every match is close our eyes and imagine how the match will go. He has us imagine the shots we'll take, imagine our defense techniques, and most importantly, imagine your hand being raised at the end of a match. At first, I thought this seemed cliche and a bit cheesy, but it works. It instilled a confident mentality, which allowed me to go into each match with certainty. Now that I have this technique, I use it in many different situations to create a mentality that is necessary to accomplish the task at hand. I am beyond grateful for the experiences I have had from wrestling. I have become more confident in myself, more determined, and have found great success in my day-to-day life. Despite the mental and physical hardships that I have gone through while wrestling, there have been so many useful lessons that I have learned and I will carry out throughout my life. Thank you.
What a wonderful reminder of some things that we can all take away. And my goodness, if I had learned those lessons at that stage of life, we're so grateful you shared all of that with us. Next, Joel talked about it a little bit last week. You saw it in this morning's email. February 1st, tomorrow, Downtown Rotary is stepping into our Show the Love membership drive where we have set a very aggressive goal to add 20 new Rotarians, which will catapult us into one of the top 20 clubs in the world. What I am asking of those of you in the room today is to invite someone to attend Rotary with you in the coming weeks. Think about someone you work with, someone you might volunteer alongside, someone you grab coffee with every other month, someone who you view as a thought leader and a positive contributor to this awesome community. If they have a positive experience at our downtown Rotary meeting, invite them to submit an application. During the drive, we are waiving the membership fee, and all downtown Rotarians who sponsor a new member will be put in a drawing to receive free lunches for the rest of the Rotary year, which runs through June. Lastly, to wrap up celebrating January as National Mentoring Month, I invite Rotarian Janet Kiddums to introduce today's SiouxFalls.Business Mentoring Mission Moment.
All right, as Cindy shared, it's our last Monday in Mentoring Month. So I am pleased as our partnership with the Helpline Center and Rotary together, working with the City of Sioux Falls on SiouxFalls.Business, that today we're going to hear from the nonprofit perspective. So we have invited one of our nonprofit partners to share what that experience is like. And this is one of our newest nonprofit partners. So I am pleased to have with us today Chuck Jesperson, who is the State Director for Lifeline Children's Services. And he's going to share a little bit more about his organization and just his experience as being a nonprofit partner with SiouxFalls.Business. So please help me welcome Chuck.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, I'm the State Director of a new to South Dakota ministry called Lifeline Children's Services. Lifeline is very thankful to be part of the SiouxFalls.Business Mentoring Initiative, and we're very thankful for Rotary's support of SiouxFalls.Business. I was asked to share a little bit about our mission in South Dakota and what's going on already here in Sioux Falls. Lifeline is new to Sioux Falls, new to South Dakota, but not new to the nation. We've been around for about 43 years. We're growing. We're in 17 states. We just opened our office in Sioux Falls in August of 2021. South Dakota is one of the newest Lifeline states. And I'm happy to tell you we just opened a Rapid City office a couple months ago. And that's important because we serve the entire state. And here's what we do. Lifeline equips churches to care for vulnerable women, vulnerable children, and vulnerable families. And we have a little half sheet in the center of your table that kind of outlines all of that. We have 5 areas of focus in equipping churches. Our first area is family restoration. So we equip churches to care for hurting families in our community through our Harbor Families program. And I'm excited to tell you currently right now in Sioux Falls, we have 10 area churches who are recruiting volunteer host families who provide temporary respite care for children while their parents work through a crisis, which is homelessness, medical emergencies, joblessness, addiction recovery. Imagine encountering those struggles empty nesters. The key word is were, because through Lifeline's foster care adoption program, just this summer, they adopted a sibling group of 5 children, ages 12 to 4, who probably would have spent the rest of their childhoods in foster care. Lifeline also finds families for children languishing in global orphanages. We just had a South Dakota family come on board and say, our hope is to adopt a little girl from an orphanage in India who has special needs. And we need to find many more families like that, because currently millions of children are waiting, most of them with special needs. And should we encounter a woman who wants to place a child through adoption, Lifeline will walk alongside her as she chooses adoptive parents for the child. Another area of focus is post-adoption support. So many times kids who are adopted or are in foster care come from hard places, and they're going to face ongoing struggles. And so Lifeline equips and encourages adoptive families and foster families with educational services, with parent mentoring, and with counseling and therapy services. Another area of focus is pregnancy ministry. So Lifeline will walk alongside women in vulnerable seasons to offer hope and physical support and information during an unexpected pregnancy. We also equip churches to provide mentors for women. And then finally, our last area of focus is global orphan care. So currently on the planet right now, there's 150 million orphans. UNICEF estimates that 10,000 are being added to their number daily, but only 0.5% of them are eligible to be adopted. And so Lifeline links South Dakota churches with orphan care NGOs in other countries to bring hope and care and resources to orphans through trips and child sponsorship. Lifeline does all of this without relying on state or federal dollars. We rely on the generosity of like-minded individual donors, of businesses and congregations who want to philanthropically partner with us. So thanks for the chance to share all of that with you this afternoon. And we especially thank you for Rotary's support of the SiouxFalls.Business Mentoring Initiative, which helps volunteers and helps us find volunteers and mentors for our Harbor Families program here in Sioux Falls. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being part of the SiouxFalls.Business initiative and bringing to life the work that this club is putting in motion with our advocacy and our involvement in mentoring throughout our community, and clearly a multiplier effect with that. We good? Oh, I didn't know. Okay. I would like to invite our presenters and our moderator up. And while I do that, I will just make, come on now, we're all good. Here we go. I think when I was talking about Show the Love, I said tomorrow was February 1st. Yeah, I didn't mean to take a day of January away from you. Wednesday, February 1st, is when things get kicked off. Today's program is titled State of the Media. Joining us on stage is Jim Berman. He has been president and general manager of first KSFY and now Dakota News Now since 2010. Jim was born and raised in New York City and has worked in various TV markets around the country over the course of his 40-year career in television. He serves on the boards of Junior Achievement and the Children's Home Society. Jim and his wife, Teresa, have 2 grown children. Jonathan Ellis joined the Argus Leader in 2005, where he covered local, state, and federal government and politics. His time at the Argus Leader included 5 years as a correspondent for USA Today. He left the Argus in 2022 and with fellow Argus Leader reporter Joe Sneevy, founded Dakota Scout. Jonathan lives in Sioux Falls with his wife, Amy, and their 2 children. Jodi Schwan is the founder of Align Content Studio, which launched in 2017 and provides content, marketing strategy, production, and distribution for clients in a wide range of industries. She also develops and oversees Alliance original digital media brands, including SiouxFalls.Business and Pigeon605.com, along with providing business news and analysis to Dakota News Now and Kello AM. Jodi is a former editor, broadcaster, and columnist who also served as chief of staff for the city of Sioux Falls from 2006 until 2010. Today's moderator is downtown Rotarian Eric Ellefson. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, President Cindy. Appreciate you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm super excited to have this conversation and thank my guests for spending some time and sharing some insights and your expertise with us. I want to start off with a little story that I think is pretty relevant for today's conversation, and it involves my 10-year-old girl. So this weekend we had a soccer tournament out at the Sanford Sports Complex. We had multiple days, started on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Saturday, we're in between games and we're sitting around the house. And of course, you hear that same thing that I think every parent has heard at least once or probably multiple times, but Dad, I'm bored, you know? And so I looked at her and I did the normal dad thing. I said, well, go sit on the couch and watch some TV. There's all kinds of stuff down there to watch. So she proceeds to go downstairs, and about 10 minutes later, she comes back up. She's like, Dad, there's nothing on. And all I could think was, I'm having a conversation around media today at a time when, as a kid, I remember saying those exact same things. But in my day, there was ABC, NBC, and CBS. There was not a plethora of streaming channels with umpteen thousand different options for her to watch. So I think it's a sign of the times. It's definitely a change, but as things change, everything stays the same, I think. So today we're going to talk about some change, but we're also going to talk about, I think, some common threads and some similarities that have happened from generation to generation. So thank you very much, both of you, and thanks, Cindy, for reading the bios. I would like to know something unique about each one of you that perhaps a Rotarian could use as a conversation starter over a coffee at some point. Something besides a bio. What's something that we don't know about you? We'll start with Jim.
Well, let's see. 40 some odd years ago, I was playing semi-pro soccer in the Cosmopolitan Soccer League for a now defunct team called the New York Hungarians. I was a goaltender for them, and I can't speak a word in Hungarian. It was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had before I got cut, but it was fun until I did. So
Great. Jodi.
Is that real?
That's a really good one. I know.
Just make that.
Tough to follow that.
You could bond with him over soccer. This is going to be so lame compared to that. And I don't know that it's a conversation starter for you guys, but it might explain why I am oddly comfortable on a stage. Because there was a point in my life when I thought I could be a professional actress. And it lasted from about age 6 until age 9. But I was all in. And the first big role was in my school play. I was a second grader. And you had to audition school-wide, right? So I beat out the 4th and the 5th graders for the title role of Charlotte's Web. And I am told they are still talking about the death scene in my hometown. But, I aged out and yet clearly still feel just fine having a microphone on. So some things die hard, I guess.
I'll stick with the soccer theme. I am passionate soccer coach. I love coach for Dakota Alliance on a competitive travel team. So you'll frequently weekends will find me on the road to Kansas City, Denver, St. Louis, Des Moines. So I love the game. I grew up playing the game. I love coaching. Young men, young women. Coaching is not just about trying to make them better players, but making them better citizens.
if you need a keeper coach.
Yes, I know. I think
available.
we've got one.
And if each of you want to do private lessons with my daughter, that'd be perfectly
Let's
fine
do
as
it.
well.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I want to stay a little bit on the personal side of things for the next part of this conversation, but in just kind of digging in a little bit on some research. First and foremost, I feel a little inadequate being sitting here interviewing a bunch of people who do this for a living because it is not my forte. So walk with me a little bit along this path. In the research, I found out something that was very interesting to me. Journalism as a major is actually the 6th most sought after major in the United States. Business is number 1, but last year there was 93,000 journalist degrees. Now, granted, there's a lot that falls within the journalism spectrum, right? You could be marketing, you can be newscaster, you can do all these different professions, but it was very interesting to me. So sticking with that theme, I'd like to know from each of you, and we'll start maybe with Jonathan. Jonathan, why journalism? I know you don't have a degree in journalism, but why journalism? And then more importantly, why politics within journalism?
You know, I grew up in the Denver area. We got 2 newspapers every day. I just grew up in a very family that was always talking about current events. You know, we would watch the news shows. My parents, my grandparents were always just interested in what's going on, and that kind of rubbed off on me. I always kind of wanted to know, hey, what's going on? How is our tax money being spent as a kid? You ask these questions, and I just always just been interested in government and who's running the show, and holding them accountable at some level, like telling the people this is what your government's doing, and are they making good decisions, poor decisions with your tax money, that kind of thing. So I'm the one thing that I think we can agree on politically across the spectrum is we're going to pay taxes, right? And some of us want to pay less, some of us don't mind paying more, but we all want to make sure that it's being spent well. And so I think that's a passion that I had, and that's what brought me to being a journalist and covering government.
Thank you. Jodi, same question.
Oh, I got to do the short version of this. So I caught the news bug when I was 11, and for whatever reason became just fixated on the first Gulf War and CNN. I was in 5th grade. I used to wake up at 6 a.m. before elementary school to watch this news coverage. And so that sort of seeded an interest in news with me. Fast forward, I was 15. Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Gulf War, was doing a book signing at my hometown's local Borders bookstore as we talk about industry evolution. And I needed to get out of class because I wanted to hear him speak. And the way that I came up with to get out of class was that I would cover this event for the school newspaper. So I hadn't even been part of the newspaper, but it worked. What didn't work was getting a press pass because I was still in high school. So not going to be deterred. I bought a book and I stood in line like everybody else. And while I was in line, I interviewed people for my story. And then when I had my one little window of time when security wasn't maybe paying as much attention because this is a kid, I stopped him and said, hey, I wasn't allowed to participate in your press conference. Could I ask you a few questions right now? And stopped the line and asked my questions. And I got my exclusive quotes and literally left the bookstore that day. And I said, this is what I want to do. And I have left the industry, as I said in my introduction, for a time, and ultimately found my way back because I love telling stories. And, at the end of the day, that's what makes memorable journalism, at least from my perspective. And now I think I have the best job ever because I get to help businesses tell their stories, and I still get to help tell a lot of different news stories for the community.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, it started for me probably when I was 7, I guess. I had a walkie-talkie. And I was fascinated with the news. I wanted to be on the air, and I would listen to the radio all the time. I was really more radio focused back when I was really little. And I taped down the walkie-talkie, put a tape so that it would be constantly transmitting. And I created my own radio station, WJRB, my initials. And I basically, I'm sure people on the frequency were very happy about this. But I would read stories out of the newspaper. I would spin records on my phonograph back in the days. I'm old, so and I would turn on the baseball games that were on and do play-by-play. And so I really was into this, and I had a regular broadcast schedule. And when my nanny was there, nanny was staying home alone, and you have to stay in your room and you need to listen. So I'd give her the other one. I have an audience of one. Somebody would have to be listening to this. Then I got to college and just embraced myself at the college radio station and really got into play-by-play. I thought that was where I was heading, and I had some opportunities to do it. But when I became the general manager of the station, that's when I suddenly realized that that's what I really was better suited at. I loved working with people. I loved helping to help make people better. And I discovered that I seemed to have some skill at that. And I said, okay, this is the track I want to get on, the management track. And then I just took it from there. 20 years to the day that I became the college radio station general manager, I became a pro general manager. It was one of the happiest, proudest days of my life.
That's awesome. Well, let's stay with you just for a minute, because one thing we're going to hear throughout the course of this program is definitely going to be change and evolution. So there's been a recent evolution in programming in Sioux Falls across television stations. Talk us through Gray TV's acquisition of, the merger of KDLT and KSFY.
One of the most fascinating things that certainly I've ever been involved with, I've kidded with people. I said, I'll never be involved with anything bigger than building a TV station, ground up from scratch when we moved into the building we're in 2016. I said, that's going to be my legacy piece, and that's it. I was like, oh, no, we got something else in mind. And what happened was the FCC in 2017, FCC commissioners change, philosophies change, and there had often been a discussion of the ownership rules and, are they antiquated? They were formed back in, 1941, and so do they still apply today in an environment where it's not really us versus Kello, it's us versus Google and Facebook and all these other entities. And so it's really a very different environment than the way the rules were set up. So in 2017, the FCC issued a ruling saying that under certain circumstances, they would consider the possibility that a single owner could have 2 licenses. It would have to meet certain criteria of competition. How would that work competitively? Would it ultimately be good for the market?
And the market had the license of KDLT, KSFY, and Kello, correct? So 3 entities.
3 entities, but also KTTW as well. And there are other smaller licenses too. But in terms of the primary player, certainly the news players, that's correct. It would be the 3. So when we saw that come down as a company, we said, this Sioux Falls could be the perfect test case to see whether or not this actually would work. So, but obviously, for those of you who own businesses, run businesses, it comes down to a very simple thing. There has to be a willing buyer. We were a willing buyer. And there has to be a willing seller. And Red River Broadcasting, which owned KDLT, was interested in selling. So once that was established, then once the deal was put together, we had that deal. I remember the day it was announced, May 1st, 2018. But just because it was announced at that point didn't mean it was going to happen at all. It was going to take time because, okay, it's like the FCC said, yeah, we'll consider it. But it's like, oh, okay, well, now we're going to actually do it. And so then it had to go through this process because, again, there was no precedent for this. So basically, we spent the next 16 months demonstrating what it is this was going to be, why it was going to be beneficial, how it would work. And it was certainly a very interesting 16 months. I'll just say that. It would take too long to get into all of it. But in the end of the day, it went through. I was on a beach in Hawaii when I got the call. It was like, oh my God, it's finally done. And so that was in September of 2019. And that was that. And it was amazing. And it's been an incredible experience since then.
So 2019, we now have 2 entities ultimately that kind of cover the Sioux Falls and a number of surrounding communities. How have we benefited from this post-acquisition, if you will, or this post-merger as general consumers?
Well, what our whole position was with this was that it was, again, it comes down to, is this anti-competitive or pro-competitive? And our case was that it was pro-competitive because what it did was take 2 entities going up against a very, very strong player in Kello. I mean, I just want to just point that out. I mean, Kello has a national reputation. Before I even moved to Sioux Falls and knew what Sioux Falls was, in our business, people know what Kello is. I mean, Kello has, and this is just, coming from the heart, Kello is a very strong TV station. And so the feeling was that if you combine these 2 entities, KSFY and KDLT, you can create a more competitive environment, versus Kello. And so that was what it came down to. And so in doing that, we made it very clear. We were not, I wasn't going to be a part of this. We were not going to, have duplication. It's like, oh, well, we'll just simulcast everything. Remember, that was one option. Just simulcast the 5, simulcast the 6. No, we're going to launch a 4:00 news for the first time. We're going to have a 5:30 news. We're going to have a 6:30 news. We're going to create news opportunities in different time periods so that viewers can benefit from that. It also gave us the opportunity to take our respective footprint signals, which were different, interestingly enough. I mean, remember, it's not just Sioux Falls. We're covering one of the largest geographies in the country. It's a huge geography coming from the Northeast. It would be like having a market that covers New York, Boston, Washington, right? I mean, think about that in terms of the geography that we have. And so it's a very complex grid, extremely expensive to maintain. And KDLT had certain pieces of the puzzle that we didn't have, and vice versa. So by putting the two physical plants together, what we now call a supermux, okay, you can take that term home, okay? The supermux allows us to now create broadcast over-the-air options for viewers that they did not have before. So more people can see KSFY and KDLT today over the air than they ever were able to before. Again, that's not something that those of you, I'm sure all of you are from Sioux Falls, would be aware of, because here it wouldn't have been an issue. But out beyond, 60, 70, 80 miles, it is an issue. And so that solved a huge problem. And then by creating that, it allowed us to then open up a peer news bureau, get a brand new Aberdeen bureau, and basically just reinvest in the community, because it created a whole new model for us. And that's what we promised we would do, and that's what we've done.
Outstanding. We'll come back to the model a little bit later on, but let's switch the page a little bit and let's go to newspaper just for a second. Let's go to print. And I want to start first and foremost, before I get past Jim and the television side. We have Dakota News Now. When we put these programs together, for those of you that have been on the programming committees, you know you do a lot of legwork to kind of make sure things come to the table. We couldn't represent every single news organization on the stage, although we'd love to. And in the future programs, I think we'd have a wide opportunity to bring more people on. Having said that, today we're going to focus on Dakota News Now. We're also going to focus on the expertise around newspaper and print media. And then we're going to focus a little bit more on the individual independent publications that Jodi and Jonathan have. So with that being said, I don't have radio up here either. So if there's a radio person and wants to ask a question at the end, awesome. We'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about newspaper though. And I'm going to state some facts here. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but the state of the newspaper industry is, let's just say, challenging right now. I pulled a statistic from Pew, and I know Jodi and Jonathan, you guys can both probably speak to this, but overall circulation and subscription to newspapers, the statistics are fairly hard to find. But I did find one from Pew for 2020 right now, and it shows that 24.3 million people for weekday subscribers and 25.8 million for Sunday subscriptions were reported in 2020. Now that combines digital and print, and they were both down 6% from the prior year. So what I say to that is, I think if you strip away the digital aspect, which is where print has been going to on the traditional newspaper side, that number is pretty impactful. Why I bring that up is because Jodi, you and Jonathan both had time in print, and specifically in a local newspaper here. I was looking at some things from you, and when you launched Pigeon 605 in 2021, you had a quote in an article that specifically said, as it relates to time, the right move at the right time makes the difference in life and in business. I thought it was pretty relevant for today's conversation. So I want to get your perspective, and I'm curious, when you back up at your time in a newsroom, what was it? What were the insights? What was the climate like? What type of consumer behaviors were you seeing that made you go, you know what, I think I want to go and pivot and go this way?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. So it was 2016, and it was a number of factors. So I am a business reporter, I think, at heart, and so I have always dug into the industry of media, and I've paid close attention to that. And the first thing that stood out for me in my time at the Argus Leader was multiple instances when I was told this organization will never add staff. And I was told that by multiple high-level leaders, never add staff. And they were right. It was the opposite. And we enjoyed, I thought, a pretty nice level of transparency kind of over the years from our leadership as far as the numbers were concerned. And the overriding theme was that the top line was shrinking and the priority was maintaining margin. So when that happens, you cut expenses, right? Which means people, and it means that you're not investing for growth, you're cutting to maintain margin. And that was the theme. And like the news geek I am, I remember one time I pulled up the analyst call, the transcript of an analyst call after one of Gannett's earnings reports. And in that call, the CEO was asked to score the opportunity for future cost cutting as though this were a baseball game. And the CEO's response was that we were in the third inning. So when I heard that, knowing what I had already witnessed firsthand, I realized that this probably wasn't going to be the place that I would retire from. And it probably wasn't going to be the place where I even had a lot of opportunities for my own growth. And sure enough, by the end of 2016, my one full-time support person over at the SiouxFalls.Business Journal had been part of the most recent round of staff reductions. And when I went into my publisher's office to ask for an explanation as to why that person had made the list, I found out that my publisher had been cut the same day. So that was what compelled me to get whatever ideas had been bubbling in my head, out of my head, and into a business plan. And then I launched in March of 2017.
Okay. Jonathan, you walked a similar path, different timing, but I'm curious, do you have anything else to add? I mean,
Great time to start a newspaper, right? I think in my mind, I went through a lot of these reductions started in 2005. Reductions really started to happen. When I started, there were about 75 people in the newsroom. I think there are like 8 or 9 now. For me, a couple things happened. I mean, I was a little unhappy with how the industry responded and reported on the COVID pandemic. That was one issue. And then watching these series of cuts take place, I was assigned the story to write that we were going to get rid of our print press, lay off everybody in the print room. And we're talking, I had to go interview guys who'd been there 30, 40 years. And it just kicked me in the gut. And at that time, I'd already been thinking, maybe there's got to be something else. And so once I've got pictures on my phone of them taking apart the press with torches, and that was, for me, that was it. It was time to move on and try to figure out a different model. And so that's what I did with the Dakota Scout, and Joe and I did.
we'll come back to it. I definitely want to ask the question and go a little bit deeper as to your choice to make an actual print publication instead of a digital publication. But let's not gloss over the fact that consumer behavior is changing, and that's what's driving the decreased subscriptions to newspapers, which obviously leads in business to cutting costs when you don't have the revenue from the advertising side of things. I'm going to ask a question, and I don't take it the wrong way, but what protects any news organization from walking down the same path that maybe a Gannett and that organization has been down? With regards to, I mean, independent news, if you will.
Well, I mean, we all face the same struggles, advertising and so forth. And we, of course, we have not only the newspaper, but we have online paid subscriptions, and that's where we hope to see our most growth. Yes, we face the same struggles. I will say that we're nimble. We have a staff of 2 and some people who help us. So we're very nimble. All of the money that we make stays here with the community. We don't have to worry about the shareholders, the margin, and all that. That's so we're able to do this like guerrilla warfare.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, looking back, it certainly was not always like this. There was a time when it was a very good place to be if you were a newspaper. I mean, you had outstanding market share, and you had what some people in business, I think, would actually call margins that were too high. And at that point, it's when you need to be investing for growth, right? Investing for the future. And I don't think that they necessarily did that. I think they didn't see that things could change as fundamentally as they have all across the board. And that's everything from how we buy houses to how we buy cars, and classified advertising being disrupted, and the advent of even just the internet itself and social media. And I think it was just a real slowness to respond, and a number of factors that happened to the industry there. As far as for us, he's absolutely right. The overhead is much lower, but that doesn't mean we don't have to adjust. I started a digital product in 2017 and I started one in 2021, and they were significantly different experiences. So even in that time, the landscape has shifted enough, and our ability as news organizations to reach people has been curtailed, I think, significantly, even in the last 5 years. And a lot of that is because of people's changing use of social media and the social media companies limiting what we call organic reach. So our ability to reach people without paying. And I have seen that in a really pronounced way. And I think a lot of startups probably have.
Does the startup ecosystem and independent news organizations make better news, in your opinions? I mean, from the perspective of the consumer, I mean, are you able to do your job better now than you were able to do it within, let's say, the bigger parent company or type of organization?
I think I have more motivation to do my job now, which probably, inherently leads to a little better product. It is really freeing to not have to deal with a bureaucracy before you try something, right? And as much as they might have said that innovation was encouraged, I mean, at the end of the day, it was only to a point. It's interesting, and as you said, there are a number of people who could be on this stage with us, which is great, and that would not have been the case even a couple years ago. So it's a really interesting time in local news. It's actually kind of ironic that at one point I find myself saying, okay, how many people do we actually need covering the city council meeting, right? I mean, how many versions of this story do we need? I'll take that problem all day long versus having nobody there, right? Because I think the marketplace will sort that out. So I hope, because what has happened is that we have gotten more niche, right? So I do business news on SiouxFalls.Business. I do really, I think, engaging and interesting community and lifestyle news on Pigeon 605. These guys do a great job with government and politics. I don't want to leave out the nonprofit sector in news, which hopefully we can talk about because they play a really important role too. So if you can add all of that together, yes, that's better for the marketplace. Your point on journalism education is really interesting to me because that's not my sense of it as far as young people getting into the industry. And I think Jim could speak really well to the struggles to recruit, which are pervasive in this industry and not just in the Sioux Falls market, but all the way up to the top tier markets. So that being said, when you ask about the product, well, behind the product are people, right? So the product is only going to be as good as the people that we are able to hire into this industry and keep in this industry, which is a whole other conversation.
Well, real quickly, I did write down, I'm going to cite all of my quotes and all of my research here, so I will share that with you afterwards just to make sure I don't get caught off guard by a journalist actually referring my research side of things. But with that being said, I think you bring up a very interesting point, and I guess I'll ask about the hyperlocal kind of content creation, right? So you've got a number of different providers, whether you're talking SiouxFalls.Business, whether you're talking about Dakota Scout, whether you're talking about Simply Sioux Falls or Sioux Falls Simply. I think Jack and the Dakota, the South Dakota News Watch side of things. I even think on the television side, to a certain extent, like I don't know, a lot of people that will reference the T Storm Chasers, right? So, I mean, all of this hyper local kind of content creation, is it the way of the future, do you think? I mean, will the day of evolution across newspapers shift specifically to where you guys are going with hyper content creation and more independent news resources?
I would say the Argus Leader had been doing that for quite a while. In 2006, they whole redesigned the newspaper, reimagined the newspaper, and we did away with. We changed from having a lot of national stories on the cover to going local. So that has been an evolution for quite a while.
Yeah, I cover retail a lot. So I see a lot of parallels between retail and media. It's consumption at the end of the day, right? Whether you're consuming something from a store or consuming news from us. And first of all, I think that Sioux Falls as a market is just so strong and such a regional draw that there's no reason that mainstream local media shouldn't thrive here long after it may take a hit in other parts of the country. And that's why I think local TV news, frankly, probably outperforms a lot of local TV markets, despite what we know as audience erosion, just based on how people live their lives. And same thing with newspapers. Sioux Falls has one of the top J.C. Penney's in the country. Okay, we still shop at J.C. Penney in this market. We would subscribe to a newspaper, right? And I think these guys are seeing that. However, you think of the retail evolution, and we buy clothes from boutiques now, right? We go to little athleisure stores where before we might have gone to a department store. And so we are the boutiques of the world, right? We're niche products. And so as long as you are continuing to evolve what you're offering for the audience to consume to reflect where the audience is at today, I think you're going to be just fine. It's when you neglect to see that you run into problems.
To dovetail on that, I mean, it sounds so basic, but it's all about localism. I mean, in the end of the day, you're going to be successful if you provide a truly local product. And for us, we've obviously expanded local news, not to, lay too many cards on the table, but, we intend to continue to expand local news. And I will tell you that that's hardly unique to what our plans are. Talking of Gray Television, which is our parent company, I mean, talking to my fellow general managers, that is the way to go, is to continue not just news, but local programming, local development. I mean, it's almost ironic when you think back to the old days of TV when I was growing up, and you had Bozo the Clown, and you had like kids shows. And I'm not saying necessarily we're going to be doing that, but I'm just saying that what was going on with TV back in the day, a lot of it was local, right? And so I think that you're going to be seeing more and more stations looking at how to develop local content. And so that's part of the mandate to do for a lot of stations. And certainly it's something we are looking at very, very carefully. No question about that.
And I think the other thing, you're already starting to see some of this, and maybe it's a little bit uniquely the spirit of Sioux Falls, but the idea of collaborating. I mean, I partner with both of these guys in different ways. So I'm appearing on Jim. I don't know how many years.
It's been a while.
I've outlasted most of your
You're a regular. We're going to have to talk about a raise for you or something. I mean,
that would be great, because I work really cheap right now. And, we provide some pages, which has been a great benefit. I never thought we'd do a print product. And I don't know what a business news weekly or something would look like in this market. It could probably work. It's a question of, do I really want to take that on? Or do I want to provide a couple of pages to these guys? They take care of it. We have a nice, additional offering for shared advertising in there. It's great. We partner with the Storm Chasers when it makes sense. And I think, we can't be snooty in the media anymore about who is and is not a content creator, right? Or who is or is not able to gain an audience. And just because these guys are passionate about it and doing it on their own time doesn't mean they're not delivering something important to the audience, and that there aren't ways that we could maybe work with them. So I think that's the way of the future, is how do people who have their own little niche expertise maybe combine to find some synergy and ultimately hopefully offer something good to the audience.
I think it's very, very valid points, and thank you for it. I want to come back to, or not come back to, I want to start with a conversation around trust, right? I think when you start talking about all these different people creating all kinds of different news stories and media, and ultimately everyone being their own kind of glorified reporter if they want to put their cell phone on camera and record it and put it out on social media. There's an angle, I think, if you bring up media today, especially on the political front, you start talking about trust and this division in the country over the media industry. My question around this is, how does local separate from that? Because I don't feel personally, if I go to my grandmother's house at 6 o'clock and she's got, Brian Allen on because she loves him, she's going to watch that. That's not an issue if I say, hey, why do you watch Brian Allen? Or if I want to change it over maybe to Kello and I want to watch, someone else. But if I go to this television station and I flip on Fox in my grandma's house, I'm going to get an earful. Why is there such a political divide between the national side, but on the local side, we seem to care more about who's got the program and what reporter I like and who does the weather better? Like, why is that separation there?
It's a great question. And obviously, it would be interesting to do a poll here, but I don't think we have time for that. But I can tell you, I came up through the research ranks, and one thing that is absolutely true is that there is a very different perspective on the perception. And a lot of this is perception sometimes versus reality, but perception is reality. and the perception of local news compared to national news is totally different. There's no question that research shows that people have very strong opinions about national news. They're too biased in one direction or another. There are very few national choices that are looked at as straight down the middle. There are some, but not a lot. Local news, for the most part, and I'm talking about not just us, but I'm talking about nationally, local stations all around the country, have largely been immune to that. That they have stayed away from that. When we do research on local talent, and again, I spent 8 years in Chicago, so I know something about like big market TV, how that's different, let's say, than a smaller market. It's never about, well, I don't watch them because they tell the story in a slanted way. It's more about, I watch them because I trust their anchors. I like their stories. Or sometimes it's, I don't know. I've just always watched them. It could just be as simple as that. I just, why are you attracted to somebody, that you meet for the first time, right? Well, I just like them. And it's not that much different. I often talk to my own talent about that. I said, you got to think about when you go on the air, it's almost like you're out there and you're trying to win over somebody, right? And hopefully they will want to date you. And then maybe they'll want to marry you, okay? Meaning they'll become a loyal viewer. I mean, it's not that much different, but you have to earn that trust. And a lot of that is style and it's substance. So it's a little bit of a rambling answer. I apologize for that, but it's local news is in a very, very different place than where national news is. There's no question about that.
Thank you. I think just from a time perspective, I want to get to one other category. And I think technology obviously is a key driver. And I'm going to go maybe like 5 minutes over, I hope, not to go over too far. But with regards to technology, if there's one true answer to what's driving the changes in media, obviously the internet is the first one. The second one, if we have to layer that on, is going to be the mobile phone, right? Just our phones, the way we consume news today is completely different than what we did a decade ago, even. I want to come to technology and the question of what's changing in the industry. But more importantly, I want to talk about one piece of technology that's in the news today. Can you play that video really quick? And I'm going to set this up for just a minute. We're going to set up a video. It's about 3 minutes long. This was done actually as a response to a research report that was done and asked a number of different journalists, what is the future of journalism? And one journalist took the road of saying, I'm going to have an answer curated completely by computer, AI. So let's watch this really quick.
Growing trend in 2020, AI and content creation. The TLDR version of it is what
at one point just researching a little bit of journalism, and I thought, you know what? If there is an AI editor that will essentially, everything on that was curated, spoken by some type of artificial intelligence. And I think when you think about the technology of the future, what we don't know today, we don't know. But ChatGPT, if you haven't heard that term, Google it. It is coming, and it's coming fast. Microsoft just invested $10 billion into it. Kids are using it to write papers. As a non-writer, it really intrigues me to be able to get an idea onto paper very quickly that I can simply edit. But the point being is that artificial intelligence, from a journalism perspective, how do you, one, do you believe it will actually impact? And then two, what about the authenticity of the words that are coming out through a AI editor as opposed to a Jodi or a Jonathan or a news reporter that's actually putting the words down on paper? Big question.
No, those are interesting themes. I'm kind of hiding and watching how this is rolling, as you say, very quickly.
It is.
And I've thought a little bit about how that would influence my job. There was maybe about a decade ago within the newspaper industry, there were some newspapers that were kind of flirting with hiring reporters in India to listen to city council meetings and things like that. I think that kind of fizzled out. I don't know that anybody's doing it, but they tried that. At the end of the day, I mean, you have to have boots on the ground. People who are actually in meetings, at scenes, who are actually, the knowledge doesn't exist without somebody doing that. I don't know how AI is, I imagine that it will be very influential in this business in the future, and probably even in the near future, considering how quickly we've seen Facebook, Google. I mean, Facebook wasn't even a thing, and so yeah, I'm hiding out in the tall grass, kind of watching how all this is going to take place. But I do expect that it will be very influential in the industry.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, it's equal parts exciting and daunting, I guess. We use some really interesting tech tools now to surface little nuggets of news that we might not necessarily know about without those tools. And I can think today of, there are multiple pieces of content that we do that are sort of process-driven things, where if I could plug them into the right bot or something, I could comfortably do that today, as long as it was getting fact-checked and reviewed, to your point, from a credibility standpoint. I think that's a long leap, right? From being able to crank out a list of top 10 homes because some bot has gone out and mined a public database, versus having a robot literally write a story, a profile of someone, for instance, right? So I think there are probably some applications. Sports comes to mind as a scores type of deal. There are earnings stories written today with tools like this, right? Because you're just plugging inputs in.
Sure.
So you're already seeing some of that. It will be interesting as the industry evolves, though. I could almost see, if one of your values really is transparency, maybe there's a little disclaimer in there somewhere that says that this reporting was assisted by, whatever. And I don't know that would be a bad thing. But I think the big takeaway is, as I know we need to wrap here too, is one other thing that has stood out to me. This is such an exciting time on one hand, because for better or worse, I have seen multiple pieces of research that said that the top occupation among young people today, the thing that they would most like to be, is a social media influencer content creator. So on one hand, that is frightening. On the other hand, that's a huge opportunity for us if we can manage to work with this generation that is so used to creating content, because it's all they've ever known and it's easier to do than ever. If we can harness that and give them some skills and teach them to tell compelling stories, that's a good thing for our industry. And that is the kind of thing that the technology can't replace, right? It can't replace an actual person who you're following, whether it's on TV or whether it's online.
Yeah, very well said. I think, just in light of time, I want to thank each one of our panelists. Such a good discussion. I think we could go on for another 2 hours for those of us that are interested in the medium. But thank you very much for each one of your time, and thank you everybody for joining us today at Rotary.
That was tremendously insightful. All three of you clearly know your industry very, very well. And Eric, I just love the questions that you asked that brought up such great discussion. Friends, as you think about who you may invite next week and the week following, our program for February 6th is Blind Spots, What You Might Be Missing on the Economic Horizon. February 13th is about the Riverline District, which is actually incredibly timing considering their press conference is tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Washington Pavilion. Obviously, any of us can attend that as well, but we've got some great programs ahead. We hope to see you next week. Rotary is adjourned.